If you were like me and grew up in the 2000s, then there's probably no other console you associate with that era than the Nintendo DS. This thing was pretty awesome, especially if you were an RPG fan. There are the Mario and Luigi games, the Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy remakes, the best Pokemon generation, and The World Ends With You, a game reserved only for the most based individuals. Even Sonic got an RPG, and it was bad. But aside from that, if you're a fan of the genre and are looking for a system packed to the brim with these kinds of games, then you were eating pretty good. While I would love to talk about all of these games at some point, I want to focus on a slightly lesser known title, one that has a strong cult following, but doesn't have the mainstream attention that I believe it deserves. Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey is one of the best games on the DS. In fact, I'll go a step further and say that it's one of the greatest games in the genre. This might be a bit silly from an outsider's point of view, since, on the surface, Strange Journey doesn't appear to be all that special, but looks can be deceiving. Trust me, this game goes pretty hard. But before we get started, I want to quickly address something, since I know people are gonna ask. If you were to try to buy Strange Journey right now, then you might notice that there are two distinct versions of the game. There's the original DS release, and the version for the 3DS titled Strange Journey Redux. This is an enhanced port of the game that tweaks the gameplay and includes some additional content, among other changes. While I usually stick to these enhanced versions for my videos, I'm going to be doing something a little different this time around. This video is going to be entirely dedicated to the original release of Strange Journey, and a follow-up video will be made going over my thoughts on Strange Journey Redux. While this might seem a bit arbitrary, those who've been playing these games for as long as I have will understand why. The changes made to Strange Journey Redux greatly alter the core of the experience, to the point where it overshadows the developer's original intentions. There's a lot to unpack with this version of the game, so rather than bloating this already long video, I'll just be talking about the original game for now. Don't worry, Redux will be getting the dunking it deserves soon enough, but not right now. Oh yeah, and also, full spoilers ahead. The premise of Strange Journey is a relatively simple one. Rather than taking place in the post-apocalypse like the other SMT games, Strange Journey instead opens up on our modern-day society. Though with the way things are now, it may as well already be the apocalypse. Wars are constantly being waged, violent lootings are taking place, and sexual assault is at an all-time high. If that doesn't sound bad enough, wait until you hear the real kicker. Somewhat recently, a mysterious black hole has opened up in the center of Antarctica that poses a threat to the entire world. This anomaly, dubbed the Schwarzwelt, is a portal that leads to a dimension filled to the brim with demons and other threats that mankind cannot possibly comprehend. While the Schwarzwelt initially started as a 1-meter blip, it's slowly been expanding, and if nothing is done about it, then the entire world will eventually be enveloped. With the entire world at risk, the United Nations decided to take action, sending in their top researchers and soldiers into the Schwarzwelt in hopes of discovering its origins and taking it out before it's too late. You play as an American soldier who was recently recruited to the Red Sprite strike team, and the game wastes no time in introducing us to the other crew members. Some notable figures are the commander of the Red Sprite Gore, the Blue Jets mercenary Jimenez, and the researcher from Elv named Zelenin. Introductions are cut short, however, since upon entering the Schwarzwelt, the ship is suddenly struck by a mysterious energy, and during the chaos, the different teams are separated. When the members of the Red Sprite come to, they find themselves in the outermost layer of the Schwarzwelt, and if they want to destroy it, then they're going to need to find a way to get to the innermost layer. And with that, the stage is set. The Schwarzwelt poses a threat to the entirety of mankind, and it's up to the best of the best to suit up and venture through this unknown territory, finding the missing crew members and putting a stop to this imposing threat. Strange Journey has a fairly unique intro compared to the other games in the Megami Tensei franchise, both in terms of general premise and structure. Most of the other SMT games stars a cast of characters that are either in their teenage years or on the cusp of becoming adults. The Persona games and SMT4 immediately come to mind when I think of this, but Strange Journey is one of the few times where the main cast is comprised entirely of adults. It makes sense for the game's context, and it's used to great effect in the narrative. Rather than following a group of naive teenagers who eventually fall into their respective alignments, we instead have a cast of characters that are old enough to already have their beliefs formed. They have conviction and rely on their previous life experiences to take action. It's a refreshing change of pace from the usual business. However, where the opening falters a bit is in its structure, more so in how it's paced than anything. The opening hours of Strange Journey is fairly front-loaded. The premise, major players, and world mechanics are all crammed down your throat in the span of an hour. It can honestly be a bit overwhelming, and I clearly remember feeling lost during my first playthrough. Like, imagine if the intro of SMT4 was just condensed to be the same length as the one from Nocturne. Then you've basically got the Strange Journey opening. That's not to say that it's impossible to follow or anything, or that it's even bad, but it's a little easy to lose track of what's going on. Either that or I just can't read. Despite its faults, I like the intro to Strange Journey. While it's not my favorite in the series, it's certainly unique. The only major issue I take with it is the uneven spread of exposition, which is something that other games aren't very guilty of. Nocturne did an especially great job at keeping things brief enough while also making the goal of the narrative clear. You were given nothing but the necessary information needed to understand the story, but there was enough shrouded in mystery to pique the player's interest. Strange Journey attempts to do the same thing, but because the premise is inherently more complex, more needs to be established in the same amount of time. At the very least, Strange Journey doesn't waste any time in getting players straight into the gameplay. Persona 4, I love you to death, but that 3-hour-long intro is really pushing it. Thankfully, once the game officially starts, it falls into a more even balance of story and gameplay. I get that spending this long talking about a game's intro might be a bit excessive, but I don't agree with that. Hooks are important, especially if you're asking someone to dedicate nearly 40 hours to a game. Strange Journey's narrative is great, but this opening bit stands out as a small blemish. But before we talk more about the story, we've got to talk about the gameplay first. The core gameplay of Strange Journey can be best described as the old-school SMT formula reinvented for the modern age. Well, modern age circa 2009 anyways. The combat mechanics are what you would expect out of a game from the SNES era. Battles take place in the first-person perspective, and your party is comprised of 4 members, those being the protagonist and 3 other demons. Just like in the classic games, you select your attacks at the start of a round, and the order in which they're performed is dictated by your agility stat. The higher your speed compared to the enemies, then the sooner you'll be able to act. It's a tried and true formula that has worked ever since the conception of JRPGs, and just like other Atlus games, Strange Journey uses it as a jumping off point to craft unique mechanics around. The modern Shin Megami Tensei games are defined by the press turn system. This combat system was first introduced in SMT Nocturne and has been used in every other mainline game since. Press turn is great. It rewards experimentation and allows the player to come up with solution through the use of on-the-fly decision making. It's easily one of my favorite combat systems in the entire genre, and is part of the reason why I hold this series in such high regards. While Strange Journey could have absolutely just taken this system straight from Nocturne and called it a day, Atlus instead decided to do something a bit different this time around. The name of the game this time around is Demon Co-op. This mechanic follows a similar framework to the press turn system, but puts a new spin on the idea to keep it fresh, and does this in a way that you might not initially expect. For how important alignments are in the SMT games, the franchise has struggled to incorporate it into the gameplay in any meaningful ways. While there were attempts in the past to make alignments matter in a gameplay context, it mostly amounted to limiting your selection of demons to a specific alignment. In a way, it sort of bottlenecked the player into staying neutral, since if they leaned too hard into law or chaos, then they'd be eliminating a sizable chunk of their potential strategies. It was an admirable attempt to combine gameplay with story, but it ended up being more annoying than anything. This is probably why the idea was mostly abandoned by the time the PS2 games rolled around. Demon alignment sort of fell into the background, opting instead to just place all the combat depth into the core mechanics rather than external factors. Sure, alignment does influence certain things such as optional quests and negotiation, but it's mostly something that can be ignored. Strange Journey, on the other hand, builds its main combat mechanics around the alignment system. By striking an enemy with its weakness, instead of getting an extra turn like usual, you'll instead perform a co-op attack. The strength of this attack is determined by your party's alignment. You see, only party members with matching alignment of the attacker can join in on a demon co-op. For example, let's say that a neutral aligned demon exploits an enemy's weakness. If your party has at least one other neutral aligned member, then you can deal bonus damage to that enemy. The more guys you have of matching alignment, the more damage Demon Co-op deals. You can easily tell which alignment your party members belong to by the color of their names. If it's red, then they're chaos aligned, blue is for law, and white is for neutral. The alignment of a demon is determined by their race. It's something that's set in stone and cannot be changed. However, this doesn't apply to the protagonist, since his alignment is determined by choices made in the narrative. Normally in SMT games, you base your story choices solely on which ending you want to get. However, since alignment plays such a huge part in the game's combat, you need to consider the potential downsides that come with that alignment. You're gonna have to get used to trying out demons you normally wouldn't use, since Demon Co-op is a pretty useful tool for most of the game. It's worth noting that while you are encouraged to build your whole team around whatever alignment your protagonist is, it doesn't mean that you're locked out from other options. Sure, the game wants you to use demons of a matching alignment, but that doesn't mean your selection of demons are limited. Unlike the classic SMT games, you're able to use any demon of any alignment in your party. While the game wants you to have a matching team, there's plenty of wiggle room to break that mold. Sometimes it's better to not rely exclusively on demon co-op, and toss in some demons of different alignment if they fit your party composition. That's something that I ended up doing quite a few times. I would have 3 people with the same alignment, and 1 chaos or law demon that could make up in other areas. This proved to be especially useful during boss battles, since some demons outside of my alignment got powerful skills early on. Demon co-op is a solid mechanic, as it forces you to think more about who you include in your party. Not only do you have to consider a demon's affinity and skills, but you also need to take their alignment into account as well. This added layer gives Strange Journey a unique identity compared to the other games in the series. Constant thought has to go into the way you construct your party from the start of the game all the way up until the credits. Do you build a team solely around demon co-op, making sure you have max element coverage to take advantage of weaknesses? Or do you toss in a few other demons that can specialize in other fields, where demon co-op might not be the best option? Demon co-op is a pretty rewarding mechanic, thanks in due part to the immediate feedback you get from it. A lot of people say that the usefulness of demon co-op is diminished by the end of the game, but I don't fully agree with that. Sure, by the last dungeon you have access to almighty moves, but it's not the end-all be-all solution for encounters. Of course you'll be dealing a lot of damage, but good luck keeping that up with the amount of MP it'll cost you. The true utility in Demon Co-op isn't so much the raw damage it can put out, but rather how it's useful for resource management. The damage dealt from Demon Co-op is meant to be supplemental. It's an added bonus for knowing an enemy's weakness, and crafting a party with alignment synergy. This is what sets the mechanic apart from something like Sessions from TMS and Demon Sabbaths from Soul Hackers 2. Those games built their entire combat systems around the one mechanic, and because of it, it's a lot easier to notice the cracks. However, what sets Strange Journey apart from those two games is that the Demon Co-op system has a lot more breathing room. The only requirement is having demons of a matching alignment. You don't need to rely on having certain skills or passives to get the most out of it. As long as you have the enemy's weakness and the right demon, then you could take advantage of Demon Co-op. And since there are about 300 different demons in Strange Journey, there's plenty of variety. Though, I'd be lying if I said this system was perfect. As much as I appreciate Atlus going out of their way to make a new battle system for this game, at the end of the day, I still prefer the press-turn combat system from the mainline games. This is mostly due to the versatility of the mechanics. Strange Journey's core system is built around dealing extra damage, while Press Turn is built around flexibility. At the end of the day, they play very differently despite being a part of the same series, so it's just an apples versus oranges scenario. Does this make Demon Co-op a bad system? Not at all, but inherently doesn't have as much depth as Press Turn since it focuses on doing one specific thing. Though as a supplement to the core battles, I think Demon Co-op fulfills this role well. Strange Journey's gameplay alterations aren't just limited to the core battle system, as many other changes were made to facets surrounding the combat as well. The biggest change has to be the alterations made to Demon Fusion and the introduction of Demon Analysis. These two go hand in hand, so it'll be best to talk about them at the same time. Something that immediately sets Strange Journey apart from its contemporaries is the alterations made to the random encounters. Whenever you encounter a new demon in Strange Journey, you'll notice that instead of displaying a regular sprite, you're shown a series of pixelated blobs. This is due to the analysis system. As you fight against demons, you'll slowly collect new information about them, which gives you a better idea as to how they function. There are 3 distinct stages to demon analysis. At level 1, you'll be able to view what they actually look like. At level 2, you'll be able to view their elemental resistances and weaknesses. And if you have that demon in your party, you'll be able to get their source at level 3. Demon sources are invaluable, since they play a large part in party customization. Rather than relying on traditional skill inheritance, Demon Fusion instead has fixed inheritance. If you fuse 2 demons together, the resulting demon will always have the same skill set no matter how many times you try to fish for new skills. This is where demon sources come into play. Think of a demon source as a copy of a demon's essence. Normally, a demon like Jack Frost can never inherit something like Agi. However, by using a demon source during fusion, you'll be able to bypass those limitations and inherent skills that the demon otherwise wouldn't be able to learn. Want to give a physical attacking demon some buffs or even healing? If you got the right source in your stock, you can do that. While this system might sound easy to exploit at first glance, there are actually a lot of limitations in place to keep the game balance in check. Firstly, demon sources count as an expendable resource, and you can only hold on to 1 copy of a source at any given time. While you might think that you can just grind for more sources, it's a lot easier said than done. Demons can be pretty stingy. Sure, they give you a free source course if you level them up with a max analysis level, but good luck getting any more out of them. The chance of getting a new source after spending your free one is incredibly low, and the amount of grinding it would take to get another is more trouble than it's worth. This is probably the reason why some skills are spread across multiple demon sources. Not only do you end up saving time in the long run, but it's also a great way to encourage players to try out demons they otherwise wouldn't consider. You want to fuse and negotiate with as many demons as possible so you can build up a large stock of demon sources. Even if you recruit a demon that isn't very good on its own, it could always be useful down the line thanks to its source or through demon fusion. Who knows, some of those less conventional demons might even end up becoming new favorites. The demon sources are a great idea, and I'm surprised that no other game in the series has brought it back. The closest we have is the Demon Essence system from SMT5, but aside from some superficial similarities, they were implemented very differently. This system alone keeps demon fusion fresh and engaging throughout the entire playthrough. Whenever I play a game like Nocturne or SMT4, my endgame party usually ends up having a very similar moveset. There aren't many limitations on what you can and cannot transfer, so there isn't a whole lot that sets demons apart aside from visuals and stats. Strange Journey's take on the fusion system is a lot more balanced. It lifts restrictions in some areas, but adds new ones to keep things from getting too out of hand. Constant thought and planning needs to go into demon fusion, and sure, that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I find that this shakeup was nice. The only problem is that it's a bit easy to cheese. A new addition to Strange Journey's Compendium is the password fusions. Now this is a pretty neat feature. You know how a big part of Pokemon games is being able to trade your creatures with friends through the internet? Think of password features as SMT's somewhat cumbersome response. Every demon in your compendium is tagged with a unique password, and by entering this password in a specific menu, you'll be able to register an exact copy of that demon in the password compendium. Its intention was to allow people to trade demons with other players, but I can't imagine many people used it for that. I mean, you didn't hear this from me, but there's nothing stopping you from saving your game, fusing the perfect demon through the use of Mitama and demon sources, writing down the password, reloading your game, entering the password, and just buying the demon outright without spending any of your resources. Or better yet, you could just look up Strange Journey password generator and cut out the extra steps. But you wouldn't do that, would you? Alright, while it might seem as though you can completely cheese the game with password demons, it doesn't come without any drawbacks. Sure, you'll be saving demon sources by doing it this way, but the trade-off is that password demons cost a lot of money to take out of the compendium. In fact, it's almost triple the price in some cases. So if you really want to rely on this, you're gonna have to suck it up and grind, or sell some of your rare materials that's usually used for equipment. It's not even as if it makes the game that much easier because, hoo boy. On the outside looking in, the Shin Megami Tensei games have a pretty infamous reputation for being hard-as-nails RPGs. The two games that are always brought up in this fabled difficulty discussion are SMT Nocturne and this game. I've heard quite a few people say that Strange Journey is one of the most unforgiving games in the franchise, and while it can be challenging, the difficulty of this game has been vastly overblown by some players. A game's challenge is hard to properly quantify since it differs from person to person. Sure, I might not find these games all that challenging anymore, but someone with less experience will probably struggle a lot. I can only offer the perspective of someone who's played a lot of Megaten games at this point, which will be a good thing for some people, and not so good for those unfamiliar with the franchise. I will say this, Strange Journey, much like the other Shin Megami Tensei games, is a game where most of the challenge comes from adapting to what the game throws at you. You're given every tool you need to conquer the Schwarzwald, and it's up to the player to craft strategies around these tools. Boss battles are a prime example of this. Your result in boss fights isn't determined by your stats or current level, rather your success relies on how well you're able to adapt to their moveset and behaviors. Bring demons along with you that can take advantage of its weakness, while also making sure you can't have yours exploited. Use buffs and debuffs to level the playing field, and make liberal use of the guard command to keep the protagonist safe. A personal anecdote would be the boss fight against Ashura. I was stuck on this asshole for such a long time during my first playthrough, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get past him. But eventually, I decided to take a step back and change up my strategy a bit. After getting some new demons and expanding my options a bit, I came back and completely demolished him. This is the kind of stuff that sets SMT apart from other RPGs. Sure, stats do matter to an extent. Hard to think of any turn-based game where it doesn't, but more often than not, strategy matters above all else. Strange Journey just asks for you to break your old habits and stay open to experimenting. The game's harder than average difficulty is what keeps encounters fun and exciting throughout the game. However, I would be lying if I didn't say there still is some of that SMT jank. Something that's a bit harder for me to overlook is an issue unique to this game. I complimented the demon analysis system earlier, but it kinda rubs me the wrong way that new demons start off as pixelated blobs instead of showing their full sprite. The fact that you can't even tell what you're attacking seems a bit unfair to me. Sure, you probably won't know every enemy weakness off the top of your head in other games, but you could at least make educated guesses based on their design. But this isn't the case in Strange Journey, so it's quite literally a guessing game as to what skills you should use. It would be one thing if it were consistent, but the issue is that you'll sometimes come across hordes that have different demons in them with no way to tell. That's kind of bullshit if you ask me. So you better make sure you have attack all spells or target each enemy individually just to be sure. It's kind of annoying for sure, but I think that this gameplay sacrifice is worth it due to having an insane payoff. So demon analysis isn't just some gameplay detail, it's actually a narrative device as well. Humans can't see demons normally, so they use their power armor to collect demonic data in order to see them. However, especially powerful demons will always appear to humans without their demonica. That is, all except for the final boss, who initially is shown as nothing more but a series of pixels. This is such a great way to build suspense. You go through the entirety of the final dungeon wondering what exactly lies at the origin of the Schwarzwelt, and only at the very last battle do we get to witness what we're going up against. It's a great way of tying the gameplay into the story, and honestly, this one detail justifies the analysis system to me. I'm being somewhat serious. Another aspect of the combat that might rub people the wrong way are the changes made to the protagonist. This is one of those games where if the protagonist dies in combat, then it's an instant game over. No ifs, ands, or buts. Normally, this isn't an issue in other SMT games, since the protagonist can get rather decked out by the end of the game, thanks to having some of the best skills and a fully customizable stat sheet. They're basically the long-term investment character. The protagonist in Strange Journey, on the other hand, kind of, well, sucks. Okay, that might be going a bit too far, but he isn't exactly good either. Sure, he's a trained soldier, but that doesn't exactly translate all too well when fighting against demons. There are a few things done to set him apart from other protagonists in the series that are worth mentioning. Rather than learning skills by leveling up, skills this time are tied to equipment. More specifically, guns. Not only do guns have unique physical skills attached to them, but they also come with standard element skills. While the skills the protagonist gets access to can be pretty good, a lot of the time they end up being less effective versions of regular skills. Your version of Agi costs more MP and does less damage than everyone else's, and if you think that you can just spec into magic to make up for it, hate to break it to you, but you can't. Unlike other SMT games, the protagonist's stat growth isn't manual. It's instead dictated by a survey you take at the start of the game. The answer you give determine which stats are prioritized when you level up, which is a bit disappointing to see. This is one of those changes that don't seem like a big deal, but it actually is since it removes a lot of player choice. What you prioritize with the main character is basically decided for you at the start of the game, with not much room for experimentation. While you can try to break out of your mold, you're better off just doubling down and using the protagonist's turns to focus on what they do best. This feels more like a change made for the sake of it rather than one done out of necessity. I can imagine some players getting irritated with this system if it goes against their playstyle. What if I don't want to use physical skills, or maybe focus on vitality to keep the protagonist alive? Well, tough shit. You better make sure you pick the right options because once you start, there's no going back. Sorry about the tangent, it's just that this decision has always baffled me and I don't see many people talk about it. When people discuss the difficulty of Strange Journey, it isn't usually about the combat. This game has a rather infamous reputation in the Megaten community for having the most difficult dungeons in the entire franchise. In fact, I'd go a step further and say that the dungeon difficulty has overshadowed the game's reputation. And if you think I'm exaggerating, trust me, I'm not. Every day I see people talk shit about the dungeons in this game, and while everyone's entitled to their opinions and all that shit, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. The dungeons in Strange Journey are fire, and no one can convince me otherwise. I'll actually go a step further and say that out of all the Megaten games I've played, trust me, it's a lot, Strange Journey has the most creative and mechanically fulfilling dungeons in the series, full stop. And I'm tired of people pretending as if they're terrible just because they're hard. The dungeons in Strange Journey are basically what would happen if you were to take the labyrinths of the SNES games and give them a modern facelift, both in terms of visual and general structure. One of the defining features of classic SMT games was the magnetite system. This resource was at the core of the game's design, since it's what was needed to keep your demons active in your party. While a lot of people didn't like it, I was actually a pretty big fan of this system since it kept dungeon exploration fresh. The challenge of those older games was balancing the amount of demons you had summon with the amount of magnetite you had in your stock. You needed to analyze the situation and carefully choose a party of demons that would fit said dungeon. Constant thought needed to go into your party composition because of this, and the dungeons were absolutely designed around this mechanic. Nothing too long, but also nothing brain dead. Strange Journey drops this idea, and instead opts for the same party setup that the other modern games do. At first, I wasn't a big fan of this change, since I thought it took away from exploration, but I grew to appreciate it the more I played the game. Magnetite wasn't excluded to make the game more accessible, rather it was dropped so that the dungeons themselves could be more complex than previously. Since you don't have to worry about your party for exploration, more emphasis can be placed on the challenge that comes from the literal level design, rather than efficient navigation. There are a total of 8 sectors in Strange Journey, all of which vary in terms of art direction, difficulty, and gimmicks. Well, technically 9 areas, but only 8 of them are fully fleshed out dungeons, with the extra one being a micro area to explore for story purposes. The dungeon design in Strange Journey incorporates a lot of the old school obstacles to take into consideration, but they're implemented in rather smart ways. Sector A is the game's tutorial dungeon, and because of this, it focused mostly on getting the player used to the game's controls, only sparingly using one-way doors as a way to teach the player of their existence. You'll come across other familiar faces too, such as dark rooms, trap floors, status ailment tiles, forced walking paths, and so on. The first few dungeons in the game build their core design around 1 or 2 gimmicks. It's only in the latter half of the game when dungeon gimmicks are mashed together and used in more strenuous ways. Strange Journey's dungeons have a very gradual and smooth difficulty curve, each one becoming longer and more complex than the last, but it's done in a fair way. Compare Sector A to Sector H and the difference is night and day. The difficulty curve of the dungeons is unnoticeable due to the way the level design is balanced. Well, almost anyways. It's impossible to talk about the dungeons in Strange Journey without mentioning the elephant in the room. Sector E is the game's most infamous dungeon. In fact, it's probably the most infamous dungeon in the entire Megami Tensei franchise. Every day you see people posting the map of this place and just ripping into this dungeon. And you know what? I don't give a shit. This place is awesome and is probably one of my favorite dungeons in the series. And if you think I'm just saying that to be some contrarian or whatever, to that I say, yes. Something that people like to ignore when talking about Sector E is the context behind its placement in the game. Sector E is the 5th dungeon in the game, and it's meant to test everything you've learned up until that point. In the story, it's marked as the final dungeon, and while this is far from true, the game takes that idea and runs with it. Ideas that were previously introduced in earlier dungeons are brought back and expanded upon. We get the return of one-way doors, damaged tiles, trap floors, dark rooms, and phase shifting. While this sounds like a lot to keep track of, it really isn't. If we were to take another look at that map real quick, you'll see that everything is actually divided up into discernible zones. Most of these dungeon obstacles are reserved for their designated zones, only occasionally being used in other parts of the map. Having these challenges isolated from each other was definitely the right call. Not only does this mean you can have these controlled environments for testing the player, but it also allows them to familiarize themselves with the map. These different zones act as landmarks, making it instantly recognizable at a glance, which is especially important since backtracking is required to find some key progression items. What people don't tell you is that you don't get access to the entirety of this dungeon right off the bat. Rather, you gradually unlock the map in chunks that are blocked off by clear progression gates. A lot of the progression in Sector E is boiled down to finding specific key items. This is introduced at the start in an isolated chunk, and by the end of the dungeon, you're looking for multiple items for progression. If you think that this sounds tedious, it really isn't all that bad, since by the time this scavenger hunt begins, you already have access to a central hub with shortcuts leading to the different zones. It also helps that some of the items you're looking for are in brand new areas of the map. This leads us to the infamous teleportation maze, and yeah, it can be kind of annoying. I consider this to be the penultimate challenge of Sector E. Sure, teleportation tiles were introduced early on in the dungeon, but this maze is the first real use of them in a puzzle sense. And yeah, it's your standard Atlas teleportation maze shit. It's more so about trial and error than anything. Just bring yourself a pen and paper and you'll be fine. I honestly don't understand why this dungeon specifically gets so much hate. Sector E is a lot of fun despite how daunting it might seem at a first glance. The same applies to every dungeon in all honesty. It sometimes feels like fans of this series just hate dungeon crawlers, despite the fact that Megaten has been like this since the beginning. It's only in the more modern games where dungeon crawling was scaled back significantly. I love SMT4 as much as the next guy, but come on, there's no way in hell that the hallways in that game come anywhere close to what Strange Journey has. For the longest time, I've always held Nocturne as the gold standard as to how dungeons should be structured in these games. Give each one a unique artistic flair, while also offering something interesting on a gameplay level. Strange Journey is the only other game that has not only managed to match this level of quality, but has actually surpassed it for me. I can't think of any dungeon here that I dislike. Almost all of them at least offer something that I enjoy both design-wise and visually speaking. But what I think really elevates the exploration of Strange Journey is the use of the app system. While not the first game in the series to have it, Strange Journey has my favorite iteration of the app system. There are two distinct types of apps in this game, those being main apps and sub-apps. Main apps are your permanent upgrades. This is mostly in the form of expanding your core progression. You know, stuff like allowing you to open doors you couldn't before, scan for new enemies, and locate hidden passages. Arguably the most interesting and important main app is the Forma Scan app. Forma is an unknown material that's littered all over the Schwarzwald, and by collecting it, you'll be able to purchase new gear and items for the protagonist. Certain forma can also be sold for quite a high price, which makes it the best way of obtaining money in the game. I like the forma system a lot. Sure, it's basically just another form of standard chess, but the context behind the item is really cool. It shows humanity's potential to adapt to their environments, making the members of the Red Sprite feel more like a group of professionals rather than some ragtag military grunts. This detail also plays a major role in the game's story, but I'll get to that later. While main apps are nice, the focus is mostly placed on sub-apps. Now these are pretty cool. Sub-apps are passive abilities that you can equip on the protagonist before venturing out of the Red Sprite. While there are a couple of combat-focused sub-apps, most of them specialize in exploration. There's an app that lowers the encounter rate, an app that raises the encounter rate, protection against certain damage tiles, apps that specialize in demon negotiation, and many, many more. Just like in Soul Hackers, apps are a supplemental feature that allows you to customize your character to fit your playstyle. Though I find the apps have a lot more impact here than in that game. This is mostly because the dungeons themselves are a lot more unforgiving, so having certain apps equipped will give you an edge in exploration, assuming you can fit them in your budget, that is. You see, you only have about 10 app points to work with for a loadout. Each app is assigned a point value based on how good they are, with the more valuable apps being worth the most amount of points. This is why some apps are direct upgrades from others. Sometimes it'd be better to equip a weaker version of an app to save space for other apps that'll be immediately important for the current dungeon. Hell, maybe you're fine with putting up with the dungeon gimmick so you can go all out on a specific app type instead. Constant thought needs to go into what apps you have equipped, and if these limitations didn't exist, then the system would be a lot less interesting. Apps would instead turn into binary upgrades, which is fine, but a bit boring, especially in a game where its core identity is rooted in high-risk dungeon crawling. You know, it would be kinda shitty to change that for whatever reason. As a whole, the gameplay of Strange Journey is some top-notch stuff. Sure, it doesn't have the best core combat in this series, but it makes up for that pretty much everywhere else. Demon customization was given a breath of fresh air thanks to Demon Sources. There's plenty of fun optional content to tackle throughout a playthrough, and this game undoubtedly has the best dungeons in the series. The only thing that I believe holds Strange Journey back is just how limited the demon co-op system is as a mechanic. Again, I don't find it to be bad, but it's got nothing on the flexibility and strategy that comes with the press turn system, or even the baton passing from Persona 5. There are also just a lot of weird, small nitpicks I have with the gameplay, stuff that stands out as blemishes, but not major enough to overpower my enjoyment of what's on offer here. While I could just give the game my gold stamp of approval and call it a day, the gameplay is only part of what makes Strange Journey so special. We've still got a story to talk about. The narratives of SMT games usually follow the same general framework from each other, and the same basic beats are still hidden in Strange Journey. It's always about humans discovering the unknown, and through their journey, they end up developing their own ideals of the world. There's usually a conflict that puts these contrasting ideals to the test, and it's up to the player to decide which one they want to side with. In Strange Journey's case, the Schwarzwald acts as the primary antagonist of the story. It's an unknown force that threatens all life on Earth, and it's up to humanity's top dogs to band together and destroy it before it's too late. Something that a lot of people don't talk about in regards to the premise of Strange Journey is the current state of the planet itself. I always found this weird since it's quite literally the very first thing the game opens up on. The Earth that Atlas portrays in this game is one very similar to our own. However, a lot of the more tragic truths are turned up to an 11. Wars are constantly being waged, riots and lootings are a daily occurrence, and sexual assault is at an all-time high. It's a very bleak outlook on the world, but it's an important one for the game's core message. The idea that humans are inherently greedy and selfish creatures is reflected in the design of the Schwarzwald, specifically in the early areas. Sectors A through D are meant to represent the worst that humanity has to offer: their sexual desires, wastefulness, consumerism, and war. Sector D stands out as being particularly powerful to me. The labyrinth is constructed entirely out of trash, with huge walls of garbage towering over the members of the Red Sprite, serving as a grim reminder of what they're doing to their own planet. Sector C is another good example of this, though in this case, the symbolism is a bit too on the nose. Like, we're talking DMC Devil May Cry levels of in your face where it just says consume on the walls. Though this theme of humanity's sins is dropped roughly halfway through the game. Sectors E through H drop the symbolism in favor for more abstract environments. This makes sense in the context of the story. The closer we get to the Schwarzwald's origins, the less recognizable the environment becomes, with the deepest parts of this demon dimension representing the planet the moment it came into existence. A land of purity before it was tainted by humanity. This is all some pretty good stuff, but not every dungeon is a winner visually speaking. Sector G is probably the weakest link here since it reuses a lot of assets. Sure, the game tries to mask this through the theme of illusions, but I feel as though this runs the risk of lessening the impact of the other areas. The boss room does look sick as hell though, so at least it has that going for it. One of my favorite parts about Strange Journey's narrative is how dynamic the characters feel. This applies both to the main cast and the more expendable members of the crew. The journey through the Schwarzwald leaves a genuine impact on the characters. The sights they see and the trials they come across help shape their worldviews in a very organic way. Everyone's got something to say about each sector, but it's not to the same extent as something like the Persona Q games where nobody knows when to shut the fuck up. The information exposited has significantly more value here, since it works to legitimately flesh out the alignment reps as individuals. Something that a lot of people like to say about the Shin Megami Tensei games is that they're a lot less about the overarching stories and more so about the grander message. This is something that's repeated a lot, and I myself am guilty of this. While this statement isn't necessarily untrue, Strange Journey was the first one that I noticed to fully embrace the character drama side of things. Our two major alignment reps this time around are Zelenin and Jimenez. While Commander Gore technically counts as our neutral representative, he's absent for most of the game due to coming down with a sudden case of being dead. That just leaves us with our other crew members, and if you were to ask me, these two are by far the best alignment reps in the series. This is for a few reasons, but one of the main ones for me is due to their age. Unlike basically every other game in the series, Strange Journey features an all-adult cast, and because of it, we're able to have a more nuanced take on the characters. The game isn't focused on teenagers growing into their ideals, rather it's following a group of fully realized adults applying their life experiences to this situation. Zelenin, while initially being presented as cold, is actually a very kind and compassionate woman. She cares very deeply for her fellow humans and desires nothing more but to ensure their safety, and it's through her excursion through the Schwarzwald where she finds a way to accomplish this goal. While we're introduced to Zelenin at the start of the game, she only officially joins our crew during the second dungeon. A huge plot point of Sector B are the demons who run experiments on humans. They capture members of the missing elf and conduct torturous experiments on them. Seeing her fellow crewmates suffer traumatized Zelenin to the point where she refuses to use demons in battle. However, this would all change upon meeting the angel Mastema. Mastema senses purity within Zelenin, and desires nothing more but to help humans through their tough times. As a way to build trust, Mastema grants Zelenin with an angel to use in combat, and occasionally works alongside the Red Sprite to help them accomplish their goal. Because of Mastema's kindness and sharing the same perspective on humanity, Zelenin ends up building a reliance on the angel, coming to him for guidance whenever she and her crew feel lost. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Jimenez. While once a warrant officer, Jimenez joined the Schwarzwald extermination mission as a private contractor. His initial goal in the story is to find a way to escape back to Earth once everything went south. However, after joining your crew and receiving the demon summoning program, his eyes were opened. Through battling and using demons, Jimenez comes to the realization that humans and demons are very similar at their core. As a soldier himself, he's able to relate to a demon's thirst for bloodshed and battle, viewing it as their reason for living, just like himself. Something interesting about Jimenez is that he treats demons with a level of respect that we haven't seen in any other SMT games. Usually, demons are just a means to an end, but Jimenez sees it differently. No better is this shown than with the demon Bugaboo. Bugaboo is a demon that Jimenez rescues in Sector B, and as thanks, it joins his team. From then on, Jimenez starts to build a companionship with Bugaboo, initially starting off as a master-servant relationship before transitioning into a mutual camaraderie. These two characters act as polar opposites of each other, both in terms of worldview as well as in personality. Zelenin is very cool-headed and professional, while Jimenez is a much more laid-back attitude towards their situation. At first, these contrasting personalities amount to nothing more than just a few petty squabbles, but once Captain Jack and his crew enter the scene, everything changes. Okay, so I've intentionally avoided talking about these guys since there's a lot to unpack with them. But to give you a brief explanation, Captain Jack and the rest of his squad are a group of mercenaries looking to make a quick buck. They were sent into the Schwarzwald to collect rare material and bring it back to the surface, where humans could then harness its power for their own personal gain. While they do help out our crew a couple of times, mainly in Sector E, they clearly have an agenda of their own. Jimenez offers to spy on the crew, but is eventually captured, and when the protagonist heads to their base of operations, he makes a horrifying discovery. It turns out that Jack's squad has been capturing and performing grueling tests on demons, torturing them in almost the same way we saw in Sector B. And their latest experiment is to try to fuse Bugaboo with Jimenez to create a mindless soldier. Despite trying to save him, Jimenez begs the protagonist to go through with the experiment, because if they stop now, Bugaboo will die. Begrudgingly, you end up going through with it, disfiguring Jimenez in the process, but granting him with tremendous power. So much so that he's able to get revenge on Jack personally for putting him and the other demons through so much torment. After killing Jack, Jimenez plans on slaughtering the rest of his crew, but this proves to be the breaking point for Zelenin. She goes to Mastema, looking for a way to pacify the remaining members of Jack's squad. Through her selflessness and devotion to the ways of God, she's granted the privilege to ascend to angelhood. Using her new angelic powers, Zelenin pacifies the group through her singing, but this strips them of their free will, leaving nothing more than mindless devotion to the power above. This is where one of the major alignment choices happen. You see, in Sector G, there's a group of demons that were tortured by Jack's squad, and they refuse to allow you to enter unless the remaining crew is killed. Jimenez sees no issue in slaughtering them, as they cause nothing but trouble for himself and the demons. However, Zelenin wants to keep Jack's group alive, since she pacified them with her singing. The choice comes down to either killing Jack's group or killing the demons standing in your way, with no middle ground to hash things out. Captain Jack's crew, while not the primary antagonists of the story, definitely plays a large part in the alignment split in this game. They fulfill the same role that the Ashura Kai and Ring of Gaev do in SMT4, though I'd say that they fit the role of ambiguous villain better here. Jack's squad, for the lengths they go through to accomplish their goals, aren't necessarily bad people. Selfish, sure, but that's the point. They're a contract mercenary group that's only in it for personal gain. They don't care who or what gets in their way, all they want to do is accomplish their mission and get paid. In a way, it's reflective of humanity as a whole. During this time of crisis when everyone should be band together against a larger threat, humans can't help but give in to their temptations. They can't help but yearn for a way to harness this unknown power for their personal gain. While it's unclear as to what the United Nations plan to do with the Schwarzwald, the fact that they can only think about the personal gain that comes with this catastrophe speaks volumes as to where their priorities are. This leads us into one of Strange Journey's ongoing mysteries. What is the true origins behind the Schwarzwald? Once we make it to the final dungeon, everything is explained. You see, this isn't the first time the Schwarzwald has appeared on Earth. In fact, this occurrence actually marks the 7th appearance. The Schwarzwald can be best described as a force of nature. Think of it as humanity's divine punishment for abusing nature. Mankind's greed, selfishness, and violent nature gives birth to the Schwarzwald, and once it envelops the planet, all life will be wiped out, which leads to an opportunity for new beginnings. This is something that Zelenin and Jimenez take great interest in. Zelenin wishes to build a world where humanity is united. All demonic and human influence will be destroyed, allowing all life on Earth to become one entity, singing the praises of the Holy Spirit. Jimenez, on the other hand, sees things differently. His experience with the Schwarzwald has convinced him that we shouldn't fear this destruction. Rather, we should embrace it. Allow the Schwarzwald to consume all life on Earth, and return humanity back to a more primal state. One where strength matters above all else, and humanity can go back to living off of the fat of the land. Though, if you don't sign with either of these options, you can always venture through the most dangerous sector and fulfill your original mission, destroying the Schwarzwald here and now, ensuring the safety of the current world. The ending you get in Strange Journey is decided mostly by your alignment before entering the final dungeon, though Strange Journey ends up doing something a bit interesting for the more indecisive players. If your alignment isn't fully leaning on any side, you're actually given the choice as to who you want to side with at the end of the game, which I feel as though is a good compromise. Alignment still matters, but ultimately, you're given some wiggle room in case you're not fully convinced of your current ideal. It also doesn't do that stupid shit that SMT4 does, where you can be too neutral to get the neutral ending. ending. God, I hated that. The alignments in Strange Journey are pretty standard for the most part. In fact, this is where a majority of the popular sayings about the alignments come from, really. Law is about sacrificing free will for the sake of security. Chaos is rooted in the idea of freedom where strength rules all. And neutral is about giving humans a chance of living life without either influence, leaving it up to flawed mortals to dictate their own path. Really, it's all routine stuff when you break it down, but what sets Strange Journey apart from the other games in the series is the execution of those ideas. Something that I'm not a huge fan of in the other SMT games is the clear alignment favoritism shown. This varies from game to game, but usually there's a certain ending that the developers really want you to get, with the other alignments acting as fancy bad endings. I've noticed that neutral tends to be the one favored the most. The original release of SMT Nocturne really wants the player to go with the freedom ending, as it's the one that restores everything to the status quo and wraps up the story nicely. SMT4's bias clearly lies in the neutral route as well. I mean, when your choice boils down to either genociding a certain faction or saving everyone, it's clear what ending they want you to get. It also doesn't help that these favored alignments tend to have the most amount of content out of every path, quality notwithstanding, of course. However, Strange Journey manages to avoid this. Their solution? Make every outcome equally terrible. While the Law and Chaos endings have some pretty obvious drawbacks, the neutral ending quite literally doesn't solve anything. This is due to humanity's inability to change its ways. This is something that the game plainly states. Sure, humanity might take this journey in stride and change their ways for a little while, but it'll be nothing more than a fleeting memory. As time goes on and new generations are ushered in, people will slowly go back to their old ways. We're all inherently selfish after all. No matter how many times the Schwarzwald is destroyed, it'll always come back eventually. It's a cycle that'll never end, and by denying its constant presence, you're doing nothing more but running away from the inevitable. This is why the Law and Chaos endings seem to be a lot more appealing this time around. Sure, they may not be the most ideal solutions to the problem, but they're the only one that's permanent. Give up on individuality for the sake of preventing any future catastrophes, or become one with nature itself, but locked in a constant battle for survival. There is no bias this time around. You're not just siding with a character because you like them, or to stick with the side you usually go with. There's a true moral ambiguity, and it's up to the player to decide how they're going to make the best out of this hopeless scenario. What also helps make the alignments feel more impactful in this game is the natural evolution of the characters. At no point does it feel like they ever jump the shark, or come to an extreme conclusion out of nowhere. Strange Journey has my favorite interpretation of the alignment system, not just because of this, but also due to the way it's tied into the gameplay. Story decisions carry a lot more weight than ever, since it directly impacts the way you approach Strange Journey's core gameplay. I find this to be a brilliant way of having the narrative intersect with the core combat, and it's a shame that no other game in the series does this to the same extent. It's easy to see why the narrative of Strange Journey is pretty special. While it does take a lot of the familiar beats we're used to seeing in these other games, it manages to implement them in new and exciting ways. And its take on alignments was masterfully executed. Strange Journey has a very cynical outlook on mankind as a whole, portraying people as selfish, greedy monsters that in some ways are no worse than the demons that they fear. While the game does make it a point to say that not everyone is like this, the majority are rotten to the core. Even in a time of crisis, people can't help but care only about opportunistic gain. The few who do have others' best interests in mind are the outliers. In the end, like most science fiction, the issue stems from humanity itself rather than the supernatural. Even if the Schwarzwald never existed, the world is already doomed. Strange Journey, despite its fantastical nature, ultimately serves as a cautionary tale. Humans are selfish, but it's not too late to change that before we end up tearing ourselves apart. With all of this considered, it's easy to see why Strange Journey is a pretty special game. The Shin Megami Tensei franchise is packed to the brim with tons of creative and fulfilling RPGs. So much so that it can be pretty hard to pick a favorite, since all of them have at least something that appeals to someone. For the longest time, I considered the third mainline game, SMT Nocturne, to be my favorite. Throughout all of my videos on SMT games, I've always used it as a point of reference. Nocturne was my gold standard as to how these games should function on a mechanical and design level. The innovations Nocturne made on the combat have been felt throughout the entire series, and the dungeons are still among some of the best in the mainline titles. However, after finally sitting down and going through Strange Journey for this video, I can safely say that Nocturne has been dethroned. This is it. This is the one for me. Strange Journey has quickly become one of my favorite gaming experiences I've ever had. The core combat is challenging but rewarding thanks to how it emphasizes the importance of party composition. The dungeons are expansive with plenty of secrets to discover and multiple optional quests to take on. And the story finally has characters that I actually give a shit about. Not just the main cast, but even down to the faceless crew members. Strange Journey is one of the only games that make the alignment system matter beyond just being a franchise gimmick. The core themes are weaved excellently into the gameplay, and is something to consider from the start of the game all the way up until the end. Look, I know that the game isn't perfect, and anyone who makes these kinds of high praise videos feel compelled to say that, but I thoroughly believe that Strange Journey is worthy of being called a masterpiece. It's also more than worthy to be considered one of the best games you can find on the DS. Don't let the niche nature of the SMT series scare you away, because this game is truly something special. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of my channel supporters whose names are on screen now. It's because of these lovely people that I'm able to make videos at the pace I do currently. These videos take a while to make, so if you're at all interested in helping out and donating, you can do so through my Patreon or channel memberships. I have a few things I can offer in return, such as early video access, a special Discord role, and even some behind the scenes content on occasion. Every donation helps, and if the words I mentioned sound interesting to you, then you can find out more by following the links in the description. I did it! I finally made the Strange Journey video. It only took me about 3 months longer than I wanted it to. This is mostly my fault since I played both the original version and Redux back to back. I initially wanted to talk about both versions in this one video, but the more I wrote about the game, the more I realized that including the topic of Redux as well would bloat the video. Redux is also a special case since I believe that having a dedicated video on the game would be better than just cramming it in at the end of this one. Since I already have all the footage of Redux recorded, it shouldn't take me too long to crank out a video on it. It'll be a bit niche, I'm aware, but hey, better that than nothing. If you want to stay up to date with that and future projects, be sure to follow my Twitter and join my Discord server. Both will be linked in the description. Once again, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.